Gold doesn't care who you are. It makes no difference to gold the color of your hands when you pull it from the earth. But the men who took California in 1849 cared. They cared very much. And when a black woman arrived in Sacramento with only a worn leather satchel and eyes that had seen too much, nobody thought she would leave 5 years later with more wealth than any white miner in the territory. Mary Ellen Hayes was her name. And by 1855, she had gathered a fortune worth millions today. But what the history books won't tell you is this: not 1 ounce of that gold came from a mine. Her wealth came from somewhere else completely, a place the men who envied her would kill to learn. When she vanished without a trace in the winter of 1856, that secret disappeared with her. Weeks later, the leather satchel was found empty near a stand of cottonwood trees, where the ground had been ripped apart by desperate hands. Whatever was inside was gone, and the woman who carried it had vanished as if she had never existed. Before we go on with the story of Mary Ellen Hayes and the fortune lost in the California wilderness, if you love forgotten stories that history tried to hide, subscribe to Liturgy of Fear and hit that notification bell. Tell us in the comments what state you're listening from. We love to know where our community of mystery seekers is scattered across this country. Now, let's return to 1850, to a woman who shouldn't have survived, much less thrived. The year Mary Ellen Hayes stepped off the steamship in San Francisco, California was drowning in desperation. The gold rush had turned the territory into a fever dream of ambition and violence. Men came by the thousands, farmers from Missouri, merchants from New York, failed businessmen from Boston, all chasing the same glittering promise. They ripped through mountains, turned rivers, and murdered each other over claims that gave them nothing but mud and disappointment. By 1850, the easy gold was gone. What was left needed money, equipment, and backbreaking labor that killed men in their 30s. San Francisco in 1850 was hardly a city. It was a sprawling chaos of tents, wooden shacks, and hastily built buildings leaning at dangerous angles. The streets, if you could call them that, were rivers of mud in winter and clouds of dust in summer. Ships sat abandoned in the harbor, their crews having run off for the gold fields the moment they reached California, leaving the vessels to rot. Some of those ships had been dragged onto land and turned into hotels, stores, and saloons, their masts still visible above the rooftops like the bones of beached whales. The population was transient, desperate, and mostly male. For every woman in California, there were 50 men, and for every black woman, the ratio was even more extreme. Mary Ellen Hayes stood out not just because of her race or her gender, but because of how she carried herself, with a quiet dignity that seemed untouched by the chaos around her. She was tall, nearly 5 feet 10 inches, with broad shoulders and hands calloused from hard labor. Her skin was dark, her hair kept under a simple cotton headscarf, and her eyes gave nothing away. She wore a plain gray dress, sturdy boots, and carried that leather satchel with a grip that said she'd die before letting it go. She spent one night in San Francisco at a boarding house on Pacific Street that charged her triple what they charged white customers. She didn't argue. She paid, slept with her back against the door and the satchel held to her chest, and left before dawn. The trip to Sacramento took 3 days by riverboat. The Sacramento River was crowded with traffic, steamships, barges, canoes, anything that could float and carry people or cargo inland. The boat Mary Ellen took was called the Senator *, a side-wheel steamer that belched black smoke and shuddered with every turn of its paddle wheels. She stayed on deck the whole journey, refusing to go below where the other passengers, mostly men, stared at her with curiosity and hostility. Sacramento sat where the American and Sacramento rivers met, a sprawling tent city that had exploded almost overnight into something like civilization. Wooden buildings lined the muddy streets, their fronts painted with hopeful names: Empire Hotel, Golden Dream Saloon, Fortune's Favor General Store. But behind the paint, the buildings were flimsy, thrown up by men who expected to be rich enough to leave within months. Most never did. The population was mostly male, mostly white, and mostly desperate. Chinese laborious worked abandoned claims for scraps, living in segregated camps on the town's edge. Mexican miners, who had been mining California gold long before the Americans came, were driven from their own land by new laws that favored white claimants. Native villages had been wiped out by disease and violence. And black people, free or enslaved, were in the most precarious position of all. California had entered the Union as a free state in 1850, but that didn't mean equality. Black testimony wasn't allowed in court against white defendants. Black miners were often chased from their claims by mobs. Black women were assumed to be either enslaved or working as prostitutes. There was no middle ground in the minds of most white Californians. Mary Ellen Hayes was 32 when she arrived. She said little about her past, and what she did say was vague enough to stop questions. She said she came from Missouri. She said she had been enslaved there and had bought her freedom. How was unclear. She rented a small room above a laundry on K Street, paying 3 months in advance with coins that surprised the landlord, a man named Horace Vance, who had expected her to beg for credit like everyone else. Vance was a thin, nervous man from Ohio who'd come to California in 1849 expecting to strike it rich and instead ended up running a laundry. He charged Mary Ellen $15 a month for a room barely big enough for a bed and a trunk, with one window looking out onto an alley where rats fought over garbage. "You got work lined up?" Vance asked when she paid. "I'll find something," she said. "Not much work for colored women here. Unless you're willing to." "I'll find something," she repeated, her voice flat and final. Vance didn't press. Something about her made him uncomfortable. Maybe it was how she looked at him, like she could see right through to the coward underneath. Or maybe it was that she didn't act the way he expected a black woman to act, grateful, subservient, eager to please. She acted like she didn't need him at all, and that unsettled him more than anything. Mary Ellen kept to herself those first 2 weeks. She walked the streets of Sacramento with a purpose that made people step aside. She didn't smile. She didn't lower her eyes. She studied everything, the buildings, the businesses, the people. She went to the land office and spent hours looking over maps and property records. She visited the Wells Fargo office and asked about deposits and transfers. She went to the docks and watched the riverboats unload. Then, on her 15th day in Sacramento, she did something that made every struggling miner in the city take notice. She bought a building. Not a shack. Not a tent with a wooden frame. A 2-story brick building on J Street, right in the commercial heart of the city. The previous owner, a merchant named Thomas Gaines, had been trying to sell it for months. He'd paid $8,000 for it in 1849 when he thought he'd make a fortune supplying miners. But the market had collapsed. Too many merchants, not enough customers with money. Gaines had lost everything. His wife had left him, taking their 2 children back to Pennsylvania. He was living in a single room above a saloon, drinking himself to death. He dropped the price to $3,000, then to $2,500, and still nobody wanted it. Mary Ellen Hayes offered him $3,500. Gaines thought he'd misheard. He was sitting in the land office when she made the offer, and he actually laughed. "You're joking." "I'm not," she said. "You have that kind of money?" "I do." "Show me." She opened the leather satchel and counted out $3,500 in gold coins. Double eagles, eagles, half eagles. All of them genuine, all of them gleaming in the afternoon light through the land office window. Gaines counted the money 3 times, his hands shaking. He kept glancing at Mary Ellen as if expecting her to vanish, as if this were some whiskey dream. But she didn't vanish. She just stood there, patient and still, waiting for him to finish. "Where did you get this?" he finally asked. "I worked for it," she said. "Worked how?" "That's my business, Mr. Gaines. Do we have a deal or not?" He signed the deed. He took the money and left Sacramento that same day before anyone could tell him he'd been a fool to sell so cheap. But he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd made a mistake. Not because of the price, $3,500 was more than fair for a building nobody wanted, but because of the woman who'd bought it. Something about her didn't add up. Something that made him think, years later when he was dying in a charity hospital in Philadelphia, that he'd been part of something he didn't understand. Within a week, rumors were flying through Sacramento. Mary Ellen Hayes, a black woman, a former slave, had bought a building in the heart of the city with cash, gold coins. Where had she gotten it? She'd stolen it. Some said she was a front for a white man. Others claimed she'd been a rich man's mistress back east. She was running a brothel. She was laundering money. She'd found gold hidden by Spanish missionaries. None of it was true. But nobody could figure out what was, because Mary Ellen Hayes didn't open a store in that building. She didn't open a saloon or a boarding house or any business that made sense in a city full of transient men with money to spend. The building sat empty for weeks. She hired carpenters to fix the roof and replace broken windows, but she didn't move in. She didn't advertise. She didn't do anything to explain why she'd spent $3,500 on a building she didn't seem to need. Then, in March of 1851, she did something even more inexplicable. She started buying land. Not mining claims. Not the played-out riverbeds desperate men were still sifting through. She bought parcels of land outside the city. Flat, unremarkable stretches of valley floor that nobody wanted. Land that had been surveyed and called worthless for mining. Land that flooded every winter when the rivers rose, turning into shallow lakes that took months to drain. She bought the first parcel in March of 1851, 40 acres along the Cozumnes River, about 15 miles south of Sacramento. The seller, a man named William Driscoll, thought he was robbing her. Driscoll was a farmer from Iowa who'd come to California to grow wheat and corn, only to find his land flooded every winter and baked brick hard every summer. He'd paid $200 for it 2 years earlier and hadn't been able to give it away. When Mary Ellen offered him $150, he nearly kissed her. "You planning to farm?" he asked as they signed the deed at the land office. "Maybe," she said. "Well, good luck with that. That land's been underwater 3 winters running. Anything you plant will just wash away. I'll keep that in mind." Driscoll took the money and left California a week later, sure he'd finally gotten the better of someone. But he told the story in every saloon between Sacramento and San Francisco how he'd sold worthless land to a black woman who didn't know better. People laughed. They called Mary Ellen a fool. They said she'd wasted her money on land that would never produce anything but mud and mosquitoes. But Mary Ellen didn't seem concerned. She bought another parcel in April, 60 acres near the town of Freeport, where the Sacramento River widened into a sluggish, muddy channel. Then another in May, 80 acres along Dry Creek, which was dry only in summer and a raging torrent in winter. Then 2 more in June and 3 more in July. By the end of summer, she owned over 300 acres of land that, as far as anyone could tell, was completely useless. And then she disappeared for 3 months. She left Sacramento in late August, telling Horace Vance she'd be back before winter. She took a mule, a canvas pack, and that same worn leather satchel. She didn't say where she was going. She didn't hire a guide. She just rode south alone into the foothills of the Sierra Nevada. Vance watched her go from his laundry window. He felt a strange unease, like he was watching someone walk into a grave. The foothills were dangerous. There were still grizzly bears in those mountains, and mountain lions, and rattlesnakes as thick as a man's arm. There were abandoned mining camps where desperate men lived like animals, willing to kill for a handful of coins. There were native groups who'd been driven into the mountains and had every reason to hate anyone who came into their territory. "She won't come back," Vance said to his wife that night. "Nobody goes into those mountains alone and comes back." But she did come back. 3 months later, in November, just as the first rains were starting, she rode into Sacramento on a gray afternoon, her mule struggling under the weight of its pack. She was thinner, sunburned, and her clothes were torn and stained with dirt, but she was alive. And the leather satchel, which had been nearly flat when she left, now bulged with weight. She went straight to the Wells Fargo office. The clerk on duty was a young man named Peter Whitlock, fresh from Boston and still naive enough to believe California was a land of opportunity rather than a graveyard of broken dreams. He looked up when Mary Ellen walked in, and his eyes widened at the sight of her, dusty, exhausted, but with that same unreadable expression. "I need to make a deposit," she said. "Of course, How much?" She opened the satchel and poured gold coins onto the counter. They clinked and clattered, rolling across the polished wood, gleaming in the lamplight. Whitlock stared, his mouth hanging open. $4,000, Mary Ellen said. Whitlock counted the coins twice, his hands trembling. He'd seen plenty of gold in his 6 months at Wells Fargo, but never like this. Never from a black woman who'd just walked in off the street looking like she'd been living in the wilderness. "Where did this come from?" he asked. "I found it," she said. "Found it where?" "In the ground." "You have a mining claim?" "No." "Then how? Are you going to accept the deposit or not, Mr. Whitlock?" He accepted it. He filled out the paperwork, gave her a receipt, and watched her walk out. Then he went to the manager's office and told him what had happened. The manager, George Sutherland, listened with a frown. $4,000? "Yes, sir." "And she said she found it?" "Yes, sir." "Did she say where?" "No, sir. Just that it was in the ground." Sutherland drummed his fingers on his desk. "That's the second time she's made a large deposit. She deposited $3,500 when she first arrived, and now $4,000. That's $7,500 in gold. Where is a black woman getting that kind of money?" "I don't know, sir." "Neither do I. But I intend to find out." Word spread quickly. By the next morning, everyone in Sacramento knew that Mary Ellen Hayes had returned from the foothills with a fortune in gold. The rumors came roaring back, wilder than before. She'd found a secret mine. She'd discovered Spanish gold. She'd made a deal with outlaws. She'd stolen it. She'd dug it up from a grave. The truth remained elusive. The next day, Mary Ellen went to the land office and bought 2 more parcels. The day after that, she hired 3 men, white men, because black men couldn't legally testify to property agreements, to start building on one of her properties near Freeport. The men she hired were day laborers, the kind who'd come to California expecting to strike it rich and had ended up doing whatever work they could find. Their names were John Farley, Michael Brennan, and Thomas Yates. She paid them $2 a day, which was good money, and told them she needed a barn built along with irrigation ditches. "What are you planning to grow?" Farley asked. "That depends on the soil," she said. "The soil's no good. This land floods every winter." "I know. Then why?" "Just build what I'm paying you to build, Mr. Farley." They built the barn. They dug the ditches. And they kept quiet because $2 a day was more than they could make anywhere else. But they talked among themselves, wondering what Mary Ellen Hayes was really doing. None of them could figure it out. The barn was well built, but it was in the middle of nowhere on land that seemed worthless. The irrigation ditches didn't make sense either. Why irrigate land that flooded naturally? "She's crazy," Brennan said one night as they sat around a campfire. "She's got money, but she doesn't know what to do with it." "Maybe," Farley said. "Or maybe she knows something we don't." "Like what?" "I don't know. But she's not stupid. You see the way she looks at things, like she's calculating something. She's got a plan." "What kind of plan?" "That's what I'd like to know." But Mary Ellen didn't share her plans. She supervised the construction, paid the men when they were done, and then disappeared again. This time, she was gone for only a month. When she returned in January of 1852, she made another deposit at Wells Fargo, $3,000. Peter Whitlock was on duty again. He recognized her immediately, and this time he didn't ask where the money came from. He just counted it, filled out the paperwork, and handed her the receipt. But after she left, he went to George Sutherland's office again. "She's back," he said. "Another $3,000. Sutherland stood up. "That's over $10,000 in 4 months. Nobody finds that much gold without a claim. What do you want me to do?" "Nothing. But I'm going to have a conversation with the sheriff." Sheriff Daniel Coburn was a practical man. He'd been elected in 1850 when Sacramento was still more camp than city, and he'd learned that justice in California was less about law and more about keeping peace between armed, desperate men. He'd seen claim jumpers hanged by mobs, thieves shot in the street, and men beaten to death over insults. He'd learned to pick his battles. When George Sutherland came to his office and told him about Mary Ellen Hayes, Coburn listened with the expression of someone who'd heard it all before. "You're telling me a black woman is depositing large amounts of gold at your bank, and you want me to investigate her?" "I want to know where it's coming from," Sutherland said. "If she's found a claim, she needs to register it. If she's stealing it, she needs to be arrested. And if she's doing neither, Then where is she getting it? Coburn leaned back in his chair. Mr. Sutherland, unless you have evidence that Miss Hayes has committed a crime, there's nothing I can do. Depositing money at a bank isn't illegal. But if you're concerned about her funds, you're welcome to refuse her deposits. I'm not going to harass a woman just because she has money and you don't understand where it came from. Sutherland left frustrated, but he wasn't the only one asking questions. By February of 1852, Mary Ellen Hayes was being watched intensely. People followed her when she walked down the street. They trailed her when she rode out to her properties. They asked questions at the land office, at Wells Fargo, at boarding houses and saloons. And one man decided he'd had enough of wondering. His name was Samuel Pritchard, and he was about to make a decision that would change everything. Samuel Pritchard was 43, and his life had been a series of disappointments. He'd been a farmer in Pennsylvania, but bad harvests and debts forced him to sell his land. He'd tried business in Philadelphia, but his store failed within a year. He'd worked as a clerk, a laborer, a teamster, anything to feed his wife and 3 children. Then, in 1849, he heard about California, about gold lying in rivers, about men becoming millionaires overnight, about a second chance. He left his family behind, promising to send for them once he'd made his fortune. He borrowed money for the passage, sailed around Cape Horn, and arrived in San Francisco in the summer of 1850. He bought a mining claim near Auburn and spent 2 years breaking his back for a total of $200 in gold. $200 in 2 years. He was living in a tent, eating beans and salt pork, watching younger, stronger men strike it rich while he found nothing. His claim was played out. His equipment was falling apart. His wife's letters were increasingly desperate. She was living with her sister. The children were hungry. When was he coming home? When was he going to send money? He couldn't go home. He had nothing to show. He couldn't face his wife, his children, the neighbors who'd watched him leave with confidence. So he stayed in California, growing more bitter each day. And when he heard about Mary Ellen Hayes, a black woman getting rich while white men starved, it felt like a personal insult. It felt like proof the world was unfair, that God had abandoned him, that hard work meant nothing. He started asking questions. He talked to the men who'd worked for her. He went to the land office and studied the parcels she'd bought. He spent hours at Wells Fargo, watching her make deposits. Then he started following her. He was careful. He'd wait until she left Sacramento, then trail her at a distance, keeping to the trees, watching where she went. He did this for weeks, sleeping rough, eating jerky and hardtack, convinced that if he could just learn her secret, he could take it for himself. He followed her to her properties near Freeport, near the Cozumnes River, near Dry Creek. He watched her inspect barns and irrigation ditches. He watched her walk the land for hours, as if looking for something. But he never saw her dig. He never saw her pull gold from the ground. Then, on February 14, 1852, he finally saw something. Mary Ellen had ridden out to a property near the Cozumnes River. She'd brought the mule, the satchel, and a shovel. Pritchard watched from a hillside hidden behind manzanita bushes as she dismounted near a grove of cottonwood trees. The trees were old, their trunks thick and gnarled, their branches bare in the winter cold. Mary Ellen walked among them slowly, as if looking for something specific. Then she stopped, knelt, and started digging. Pritchard's heart raced. This was it. She dug for over an hour, the shovel biting into soft earth, the dirt pile growing beside the hole. Then she stopped, reached into the hole, and pulled something out. From where Pritchard was hiding, he couldn't see what it was, but he saw her put it in the satchel. And he saw the satchel sag with weight when she lifted it. She filled in the hole, smoothed the dirt over, and rode away. Pritchard waited until she was out of sight. Then he scrambled down the hillside and ran to the cottonwood grove. The hole was gone. She'd filled it in so completely he couldn't even tell where it had been. He started digging anyway, tearing at the ground with his hands, then with a stick, then with a rock. He dug for hours until his hands were bleeding and his back screamed. He found nothing. He expanded his search, digging around the trees, looking for other holes, other signs. He dug until it was too dark to see, then kept digging by moonlight, convinced the gold was there, that he just had to find it. But there was nothing, just dirt, rocks, and cottonwood roots. He spent the entire night searching, digging, growing more frantic. By dawn, he'd torn up a quarter-acre and found absolutely nothing. But he'd seen her take something. He was sure of it. The next day, exhausted and filthy, he went to the sheriff's office. Sheriff Coburn looked up as Pritchard stumbled in. The man looked like he'd been dragged behind a horse. His clothes were caked with mud, his hands were bleeding, and his eyes were wild. "Mr. Pritchard," Coburn said carefully, "what can I do for you?" "I know where she's getting it," Pritchard said, his voice shaking. "I know where the gold is coming from." "Who are we talking about?" "Mary Ellen Hayes. I followed her. I watched her dig it up." Coburn's expression hardened. "You followed her?" "Yes. To her property on the Cozum's River. She dug a hole and pulled something out. Something heavy. She put it in her satchel and left." "And then what did you do?" "I went to the hole. I dug it up, but there was nothing there." "So you trespassed on her property and destroyed her land looking for something that wasn't there." "It was there. I saw her take it." "Mr. Pritchard, I'm going to tell you this once, and I want you to listen carefully. You need to leave Miss Hayes alone. You need to go back to your claim, or better yet, go home to Pennsylvania, because if I hear you've been following her again or trespassing on her property or harassing her in any way, I will arrest you. Do you understand?" Pritchard stared, his mouth working soundlessly. Then he turned and stumbled out. But he didn't leave her alone. He couldn't. The obsession had taken root, choking out everything else. He started talking. He told his story in every saloon, every boarding house, every place where frustrated miners gathered. And the story grew with each telling. Mary Ellen Hayes wasn't just finding gold. She was sitting on a mother lode. She had a secret mine. She had a map. She had knowledge from someone who'd been in California before the rush. Maybe a dying prospector told her. Maybe she stole it from a Spanish mission. Maybe she made a deal with the devil. The rumors spread like wildfire, and by March, half the city was talking about her. Mary Ellen noticed the change immediately. The stares on the street became more hostile. Men followed her openly now, not even hiding. They stood outside her building on J Street, watching the windows, waiting. She hired a man named Jacob Stern to accompany her when she left the city. Stern was a former soldier, a Mexican-American war veteran who'd come to California for gold and found only disappointment. He was in his 40s, with gray in his beard and a scar across his left cheek from a saber cut. He didn't talk much, but he carried a rifle and knew how to use it. "You expecting trouble?" he asked when she hired him. "I'm preparing for it," she said. "What kind of trouble?" "The kind that comes from men who think they're entitled to what I have." Stern nodded. He'd seen enough of California to know exactly what she meant. They rode out together to her properties. Stern, always a few paces behind, his eyes scanning the tree line, his hand near his rifle. They were followed, of course. Men on horseback, keeping their distance, but always there, always watching. "You want me to run them off?" Stern asked one day. "No," Mary Ellen said. "Let them watch. They won't see anything." And they didn't. Because Mary Ellen had stopped digging. She'd stopped her trips into the foothills. Instead, she focused on her properties, supervising more barns, more irrigation ditches, more infrastructure nobody understood. The deposits at Wells Fargo stopped. For 3 months, March through May of 1852, she didn't deposit a single coin. People whispered that she'd run out of gold, that whatever she'd been digging up was gone, that she was finished. But then in June, she did something that made everyone realize they'd been wrong about her from the beginning. She started leasing her land to farmers. Not mining land. Farmland. Those flat, supposedly worthless parcels that flooded every winter. She started renting them to farmers desperate for land to cultivate. The first farmer to lease from her was a man named Heinrich Müller, a German immigrant who'd come to California with his wife and 4 children. Müller had tried mining and failed. He'd tried labor and barely fed his family. But he knew farming. He'd grown up on a farm in Bavaria, and he knew good soil. When Mary Ellen offered to lease him 40 acres near Freeport for $200 a year, he jumped. The land floods, she warned him. Every winter the river rises and covers everything. I know, Mueller said. But when the water goes down, it leaves behind silt-rich soil. I can grow wheat there, maybe vegetables. It's better than anything else I've found in California. He signed the lease in June. By July, he had crops in the ground. By September, he was harvesting wheat that grew taller and thicker than anything he'd seen in Germany. Word spread. Other farmers came to Mary Ellen asking to lease land. She was selective, choosing people who knew what they were doing, who understood the floods weren't a curse but a blessing. By the end of 1852, she had 10 farmers leasing her land, and the income was substantial. But it still didn't answer the question everyone was asking: where had she gotten the money to buy all that land in the first place? Because even with the leases, the math didn't add up. She'd spent over $20,000 in 2 years. And the only deposits anyone had seen were the ones after her trips into the foothills. So the rumors persisted. And in the fall of 1853, a new theory emerged. A man named Charles Whitman, a surveyor who'd worked in the Sierra Nevada before the gold rush, claimed he'd heard a story from a Mexican miner about a cache of gold hidden by Spanish missionaries in the 1700s. Whitman told the story in the Golden Dream Saloon one night. The missionaries were moving gold from Southern California missions to San Francisco, he said. They had mule trains loaded with gold candlesticks, crosses, coins. But they were attacked by a Miwok raiding party in the foothills. Most were killed. The survivors buried the gold and marked the location with symbols carved into trees. They meant to come back, but they never did. Some died of wounds. Others were killed later. The location was lost. And you think Mary Ellen Hayes found it? Someone asked. I think she found something, Whitman said. How else do you explain it? She shows up with nothing and in 2 years she's richer than any of us. She's not mining. She's not running a business. She's digging something up, and it's not from any registered claim. The story spread through Sacramento, through the mining camps, through San Francisco. It was a good story, romantic, mysterious, just plausible enough. And people wanted to believe it because the alternative, that a black woman had been smarter and more strategic than every white man in California, was too humiliating to accept. Mary Ellen ignored the rumors. She kept leasing land. She kept improving her properties. And in the spring of 1854, she did something that proved she wasn't just lucky. She was brilliant. The winter of 1853 to 1854 brought the worst flood Sacramento had ever seen. The American River overflowed in December, and the Sacramento River followed in January. The city became a lake. Water rose to second floors. People drowned in their sleep. The tent city was swept away. Wooden structures leaned at drunken angles, their foundations undermined. Mary Ellen's properties, those flat, supposedly worthless stretches, were underwater for 3 months. When the water receded in March, something remarkable happened. The land she'd bought was now covered in a thick layer of silt. Rich, dark soil that hadn't been there before. And when the farmers started planting that spring, they discovered the soil was some of the most fertile in California. Heinrich Müller's wheat crop that year was so abundant he made enough to buy his own land. Other farmers had similar success. And suddenly everyone realized what Mary Ellen Hayes had known all along: the floods weren't a disaster. They were a resource. The rivers carried sediment from the mountains, and that sediment was gold, not the kind you hold, but the kind that makes things grow. She'd known. Somehow she'd known the floods would come, that the rivers would deposit nutrient-rich soil, that the land everyone dismissed would become valuable. And she'd bought it for pennies. By summer of 1854, she was leasing parcels at rates that made her wealthier than any gold strike could have. She wasn't mining. She was farming. Or rather, she was renting land to people who would farm it and taking a percentage. It was brilliant. It was legal. And it made the men who'd been harassing her look like fools. But it didn't stop them. Because now, instead of being curious, they were angry. They felt cheated, as if she'd stolen something that rightfully belonged to them. And that anger was about to turn dangerous. In the summer of 1854, a group of miners and failed businessmen formed the Sacramento Prosperity Committee. It was a polite name for a vigilante organization. Their stated goal was to ensure fair distribution of California's resources. Their actual goal was to force Mary Ellen Hayes to reveal her secret or drive her out of California. The committee was led by a lawyer named Richard Brennan, a man from Boston who'd come to California expecting to make a fortune representing miners in legal disputes. But there weren't enough disputes, and the ones that existed were settled with fists or guns. Brennan was bitter, broke, and looking for a cause to restore his importance. Mary Ellen Hayes became that cause. "She's a threat to the natural order," Brennan said at the committee's first meeting in a back room of the Empire Hotel. "She's accumulated wealth and property that should belong to white men. She's done it through deception, through manipulation, through methods we don't understand. If we allow her to continue, what message does that send? That a Negro woman can come to California and take what she wants? That the rules don't apply to her?" There were murmurs of agreement from the 15 men in the room: failed miners, struggling merchants, laborers who'd come for opportunity and found disappointment. They needed someone to blame, and Mary Ellen Hayes was a convenient target. "What do you propose we do?" asked Walter Simmons, a merchant who'd lost his store. "We start by pressuring the land office," Brennan said. "We demand an investigation into her purchases. We claim she used fraudulent documents, bribed officials, manipulated the system. We make enough noise that they have to look into it. And if they don't find anything, we take more direct action." The committee started their campaign in August. They filed complaints with the land office. They wrote letters to the territorial governor. They published articles in the Sacramento Union questioning how a black woman could accumulate so much wealth so quickly. The land office reviewed her transactions. Every deed was legitimate. Every payment was made in full in gold coin. Every document was properly signed and witnessed. There was nothing irregular. The committee wasn't satisfied. They started buying up land around Mary Ellen's properties, hoping to box her in, to force her to sell. But Mary Ellen didn't sell. She just stopped expanding. She focused on the land she already owned, improving it, building more infrastructure, making it more productive. And she kept making money. By the fall of 1854, her properties were generating over $10,000 a year in lease income. She was one of the wealthiest people in Sacramento. That's when the harassment turned violent. In September, one of her barns was set on fire. It burned to the ground before anyone could stop it. Mary Ellen reported it to the sheriff, but there were no witnesses, no evidence. "Could have been an accident," Sheriff Coburn said, though his tone suggested he didn't believe it. "It wasn't an accident," Mary Ellen said. "Can you prove that?" "No." "Then there's nothing I can do." A week later, fences on another property were torn down. Irrigation ditches were filled with rocks and debris. Crops were trampled. Again, no witnesses. Mary Ellen hired more guards. She armed them with rifles and told them to shoot anyone who trespassed. She stopped going anywhere alone. Jacob Stern became her constant companion, silent and watchful, his rifle always within reach. But the threats didn't stop. Men shouted at her on the street, calling her names. They followed her to Wells Fargo and demanded to know where her gold came from. They stood outside her building at night, drunk and angry, yelling threats until Stern came out with his rifle and they scattered. In October, the Sacramento Prosperity Committee sent a delegation to her office. 5 men led by Richard Brennan, who fancied himself reasonable. They didn't knock. They just walked in as if they owned the place. Mary Ellen was at her desk reviewing lease agreements. She looked up as they entered, her expression unreadable. "Miss Hayes," Brennan said, his voice dripping with false courtesy. "We'd like to have a conversation with you." "Then have it and leave," she said. "We're here to make you an offer. We're prepared to buy all your properties for $50,000. That's more than you paid, and it's a fair price. I'm not selling. Miss Hayes, you must understand your position. You're a woman, and a Negro woman at that. You have no protection here. No legal standing. If something happens to you, there'd be no one to speak for you, no one to defend your interests. Is that a threat, Mr. Brennan? It's a reality. We're offering you a way out, a way to leave California with money and your life intact. I suggest you take it. Mary Ellen stood up. She was taller than Brennan, and she used that height, looking down at him with those unreadable eyes. Gentlemen, she said, her voice cold and steady, I've heard enough. You can leave now. We're not leaving until. Jacob Stern stepped forward from the door. He didn't say anything. He just rested his hand on his rifle. The men left, but the threats escalated. In November, someone broke into her building on J Street. They didn't steal anything. They tore the place apart, smashing furniture, ripping up floorboards, clearly looking for something. When Mary Ellen arrived the next morning, she found a message painted on the wall in black tar. Asterisk, tell us where it is or we'll take it from your corpse. Asterisk. She stood in the wreckage a long time, her face expressionless. Then she walked to the sheriff's office. Coburn looked at the damage and shook his head. This is getting out of hand. Yes, it is. Miss Hayes, I think you should consider leaving Sacramento. Go to San Francisco. Start over somewhere safer. I'm not leaving. Then I can't guarantee your safety. I don't have the manpower to protect you 24 hours a day. I'm not asking you to protect me, Sheriff. I'm asking you to do your job and find out who's threatening me. I'll do what I can. But you need to understand, there are a lot of people in this city who don't want you here. And some are willing to do more than threaten. Mary Ellen left and went back to her building. She hired carpenters to repair the damage. She installed heavy locks on every door and window. She bought a pistol and learned how to use it. And she stopped making trips into the foothills entirely for 3 months, from November 1854 through January 1855. She stayed in Sacramento. She managed her properties from her office. She met with farmers, negotiated leases, handled her business with the same calm efficiency. But people noticed the change. She was more guarded, more careful. And the deposits at Wells Fargo stopped again. In December, a rumor started that she'd run out of gold, that whatever she'd been digging up was gone, that she was finished. The Sacramento Prosperity Committee increased their offer to $60,000. She refused again. Then, on the night of January 12, 1855, something happened that changed everything. Samuel Pritchard was found dead on one of Mary Ellen's properties near the Cozumnes River. He'd been shot once in the chest at close range. His body was discovered by Heinrich Müller, who'd been checking his wheat fields early in the morning and saw a figure lying near the Cottonwood Grove. Müller rode to Sacramento and reported it. By noon, Coburn was at the scene with a deputy and a doctor acting as coroner. Pritchard had been dead for hours. He'd been shot with a large caliber rifle, the bullet entering his chest and exiting his back. He died almost instantly. Near his body was a shovel, and the ground around the cottonwood trees had been torn up as if he'd been digging. He was looking for her gold, Müller said. Everyone knows he was obsessed with it. Coburn examined the scene. The ground was soft from recent rains, and there were footprints everywhere, Pritchard's and at least 2 other sets. One set was smaller, possibly a woman's. The other was larger, a man's boots. Who else was here? Coburn asked. I don't know, Müller said. I just found him like this. Coburn sent his deputy to bring in Mary Ellen Hayes and Jacob Stern for questioning. They came willingly. Mary Ellen sat in the sheriff's office with that unreadable expression while Stern stood by the door, silent and watchful. Mr. Pritchard was found dead on your property, Coburn said. Shot with a rifle. Can you tell me what happened? I can, Mary Ellen said. I was there. Coburn leaned forward. You were there? Yes. Jacob and I went to the property last night to check the irrigation system. When we arrived, we found Mr. Pritchard digging near the cottonwood trees. He had a gun. He pointed it at us. He said he was going to find what I'd been hiding, and if I tried to stop him, he'd kill me. And then what happened? Jacob told him to leave. Mr. Pritchard refused. He fired at us. Missed. Jacob fired back. Didn't miss. So you're saying it was self-defense? Yes. Coburn looked at Stern. Is that what happened? Yes, sir. Why didn't you report it? We were going to, Mary Ellen said. But it was late and we were shaken. We decided to wait until morning. I didn't expect someone to find him so quickly. Coburn sat back. He believed them. Or at least he believed Pritchard had been trespassing and probably armed. But he also knew arresting a white man for killing another white man in defense of a black woman would be complicated. I'm going to have to arrest Mr. Stern. There'll be a trial. A jury will decide if it was self-defense. I understand, Mary Ellen said. Stern was arrested and held in the county jail. The trial was scheduled for March. The news spread like wildfire. Samuel Pritchard, obsessed with Mary Ellen Hayes, had been shot and killed on her property. Jacob Stern, her hired guard, was arrested. Now there would be a trial. The Sacramento Prosperity Committee saw their chance. They hired a prosecutor, Thomas Langley, a former district attorney from New York. They packed the courtroom with supporters. They made sure every newspaper in California knew about the trial. This was their chance to destroy Mary Ellen Hayes. The trial began on March 15, 1855, in a makeshift courtroom on J Street, packed with miners, merchants, and curiosity seekers. The room was hot and stuffy, thick with the smell of unwashed bodies and tobacco. Jacob Stern sat at the defense table, silent and stoic, while Thomas Langley laid out the prosecution's case. Gentlemen of the jury, Langley said, pacing. The facts are simple. Samuel Pritchard was found dead on property owned by Mary Ellen Hayes. He was shot with a rifle. Jacob Stern carries a rifle. He was hired to protect Miss Hayes. Multiple witnesses will testify that Mr. Stern threatened Mr. Pritchard in the past, warning him to stay away. He paused. The defense will claim self-defense, that Mr. Pritchard was trespassing, armed, that he threatened Miss Hayes. But I ask you, why was Mr. Pritchard on that property? What was he looking for? And why did Miss Hayes and Mr. Stern go there in the middle of the night? He turned to the jury. I submit that Mr. Pritchard was murdered because he knew too much, because he discovered something Miss Hayes wanted hidden. And Mr. Stern, acting on her orders, killed him to protect that secret. It was a compelling argument. The jury listened intently. Then Mary Ellen Hayes took the stand. She wore a simple black dress, her hair covered with a dark scarf. She sat with her hands folded, calm and composed. Her lawyer, David Foster, asked her to describe what happened that night. She told the story in a clear, steady voice. She and Jacob had gone to check the irrigation system. They found Pritchard digging. He was armed. He threatened them. Jacob defended them. Miss Hayes, Foster said, Mr. Langley has suggested Mr. Pritchard was killed because he knew too much. What do you say to that? I say it's nonsense, Mary Ellen replied. Mr. Pritchard didn't know anything. He thought I had a secret mine or a cache of gold or hidden treasure. He thought that's where my money came from. But he was wrong. Then where did your money come from? Mary Ellen looked at the jury. She took a deep breath. I was enslaved for 23 years. I was owned by a man named Robert Hayes, a plantation owner in Missouri. He was cruel, but careless. He kept his money in a safe in his study, and he thought I was too stupid to notice the combination. But I watched him open it every day for 10 years. And when he died in 1849, I opened that safe, took everything inside, and bought my freedom from his widow. The courtroom went silent. I took $12,000, she continued. Money he'd made selling crops grown by people he enslaved. Money he'd made selling people. I took it and used it to come to California. I used it to buy land that I knew would be valuable because I'd spent my life watching white men underestimate black people. I knew they'd dismiss floodplains as worthless. I knew they'd chase gold instead of thinking about soil. And I knew that if I was patient, if I was smart, I could build something they'd never be able to take. She paused, her eyes moving across the jury. There is no secret mine. There is no cache of gold. There is no hidden treasure. There is only land. And the willingness to see value where others saw nothing. Thomas Langley stood up. Miss Hayes, you expect this court to believe you stole $12,000 from your former owner? I didn't steal it, she said. I took what was owed to me. 23 years of labor, of suffering, of being treated as property. $12,000 doesn't begin to cover that debt. But you admit you took the money without permission. I took what was mine. And the deposits at Wells Fargo? The $4,000 in November 1850, the $3,000 in January 1852. Where did that come from? Mary Ellen smiled slightly. I didn't spend all $12,000 at once, Mr. Langley. I kept some in reserve. I made deposits when I needed to make it look like I was finding gold, because I knew if people thought I was just another prospector, they'd leave me alone. But I was wrong about that, wasn't I? Langley pressed her for another hour, trying to find inconsistencies, but she didn't waver. Her story remained consistent, plausible, and impossible to disprove. The jury deliberated 3 hours. They found Jacob Stern not guilty. The courtroom erupted. Some cheered, others shouted in anger. Richard Brennan and the Sacramento Prosperity Committee stormed out, faces red with rage. Mary Ellen Hayes sat quietly, her expression unchanged. She'd won, but she knew the victory would come at a cost. After the trial, Mary Ellen Hayes became a legend. Newspapers in San Francisco picked up the story. The Alta California ran a front-page article titled "The Richest Negro Woman in California." The Sacramento Union praised her intelligence and business acumen. The New York Tribune mentioned her in a piece about the changing West. Some praised her ingenuity. Others condemned her for theft, ignoring that the money came from enslaving people. But everyone agreed, she was the richest black woman in California, possibly in America. By 1855, her properties were worth over $200,000. She employed dozens. She'd built a network of farms supplying Sacramento with grain, vegetables, fruit. She'd proven wealth in California didn't have to come from gold. It could come from land, from patience, from seeing opportunities others missed. But the harassment never fully stopped. There were always men who resented her success. She continued to hire guards. She continued to arm herself. And she continued to build. In the fall of 1855, she bought a house in Sacramento, a real house, not a room above a laundry. It was a 2-story Victorian on H Street with a garden and a white picket fence. She paid $5,000 cash. She furnished it with care books, furniture, things she'd never been allowed to own. For the first time in her life, she had a home. She threw a small gathering in November, inviting the farmers who leased her land and merchants who treated her fairly. It was modest, coffee and cake, polite conversation, but significant. A black woman hosting white people in her own home in a city where black people couldn't testify in court. Heinrich Müller attended with his wife. "You've done something remarkable," he told her. "You've built something that will last." "I hope so," Mary Ellen said. "You should be proud." "I'm cautious. Pride comes before a fall." She was right to be cautious. In December, she received a letter. It was unsigned, written in a crude hand on cheap paper. "You think you've won. You haven't. We know what you took. We know where you've been, and we're going to take it all back. She showed it to Jacob Stern. "You think it's the committee?" he asked. "Probably. Or someone connected to them. What do you want to do?" "Nothing. They're trying to scare me. I won't give them the satisfaction." But she increased security. She hired 2 more guards. She had locks installed on every door and window. She stopped going anywhere without Jacob. Then, in January of 1856, she made a decision that surprised everyone. She announced she was taking a trip. "Where are you going?" Jacob asked. "Back to the foothills," she said. "There's something I need to do." "What?" "I need to close a chapter. I need to make sure what I left behind stays buried." "You want me to come with you?" "No. I need to do this alone. That's not safe." "I know. But it's necessary." She left Sacramento on January 20th, 1856. She told her business manager, William Harding, she'd be back in 2 weeks. She took a horse, a pack with supplies, and that same worn leather satchel. She rode east toward the Sierra Nevada foothills, following the same route she'd taken before. Jacob Stern watched her go, unease settling in his chest. "She'll be fine," Harding said. "She's been out there before." "Not alone," Stern said. "Never alone." 2 weeks passed. Mary Ellen didn't return. 3 weeks, 4 weeks. By the end of February, people were worried. Harding organized a search party. They rowed out to the Cozumnes River, to her property, to places she'd been known to visit. They found her horse wandering near the river, still saddled, but no rider. They found her pack abandoned near the Cartonwood Grove where Samuel Pritchard had died. The pack had been opened, its contents scattered: a blanket, some food, a canteen. But they didn't find Mary Ellen. And they didn't find the satchel. The search continued for weeks. They combed the foothills, following every trail, checking every canyon, every abandoned mining camp. They asked miners and prospectors if they'd seen a black woman traveling alone. Nobody had. Sheriff Coburn organized a larger search, bringing in volunteers from Sacramento. They searched for a month, covering hundreds of square miles. They found nothing. By April, the search was called off. Mary Ellen Hayes was declared missing, presumed dead. Her properties were eventually sold by the state. The proceeds went to creditors and claimants. The house on H Street was auctioned to a banker from San Francisco. The land she'd bought was divided and resold. Within a decade, nobody remembered who first saw its value. But in Sacramento, in the years that followed, people would sometimes tell stories about Mary Ellen Hayes, about the black woman who beat the gold rush without ever swinging a pickaxe, about the fortune she built from nothing, and the secret she took when she vanished. And every so often, someone would go out to the Cozumnes River, to those Cartonwood trees, and dig looking for a box, a clue, an answer to the question nobody could let go. What was in that satchel? Some said she'd been murdered by the Sacramento Prosperity Committee, killed for refusing to reveal her secret. Others said she'd decided to leave, to start over somewhere new, somewhere she wouldn't be watched and threatened. A few claimed she went back to Missouri to settle old scores. There was even a rumor she'd never left the foothills, that she'd found a place so remote, so hidden, she could live there in peace, away from the men who wanted what she'd built, that she was still out there, living on her own terms. But nobody knew for sure. And that, perhaps, was exactly what Mary Ellen Hayes wanted. The truth is, we'll never know what happened to her. We'll never know what was in that satchel, where she went, whether she died in those mountains or found a way to disappear completely. What we do know is this: Mary Ellen Hayes came to California with nothing and built a fortune through intelligence, patience, and an understanding of value that went far beyond gold. She saw what others missed. She planned when others reacted. She survived in a place designed to destroy people like her. And when she left, whether by choice or by force, she left behind a mystery that has never been solved. In 1872, 16 years after Mary Ellen disappeared, a farmer plowing a field near the Cozumnes River found something buried in the soil. It was a metal box, rusted but intact. Inside were Spanish coins, like in the stories. There were also papers, deeds, maps, documents in Spanish nobody could read. The farmer took the box to Sacramento, hoping to learn its worth. But before he could sell it, the box was stolen from his hotel room. It was never recovered. Was it connected to Mary Ellen Hayes? Nobody knows. But the timing and location near those Cartonwood trees were interesting. Maybe she had found Spanish gold. Maybe that's where some of the money came from. Or maybe the box was planted by someone who wanted to keep the legend alive, to keep people searching, to keep the mystery unsolved. We'll never know. What we do know is that Mary Ellen Hayes changed California. She proved wealth could come from seeing value where others saw nothing. She proved intelligence and patience could triumph over brute force and desperation. And she proved that a black woman in a time and place designed to keep her powerless could build something extraordinary. Her story should be taught in schools. Her name should be remembered alongside the pioneers who shaped the American West. But it isn't, because history forgets the people who don't fit the narrative it wants to tell. But we remember. And as long as we tell her story, as long as we ask the questions she left behind, Mary Ellen Hayes will never truly disappear. What do you think happened to Mary Ellen Hayes? Do you believe she found Spanish gold, Or was her wealth built entirely on the money she took from her enslaver? Do you think she was murdered, or did she find a way to escape and start over? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story and want more forgotten tales from America's dark past, subscribe to Liturgy of Fear, hit that notification bell, and share this video with someone who loves a good mystery.